You know the story, right? David, the young shepherd with nothing but a sling, takes on the terrifying Philistine giant Goliath. It's the ultimate underdog story, a lesson in faith over fear that pretty much everyone on earth has heard of.
But what if I told you that the Bible itself seems to tell a different story? That hidden right there in its pages is a major contradiction about who actually killed the most famous giant of all time.
And here it is. Check this out. On one side, you've got 1 Samuel 17, the story we all know, saying David killed Goliath. But then you flip over to 2 Samuel, and it says a guy named Elhanan struck down Goliath the Gittite. So, what gives? We've got 2 different guys being credited for killing the very same giant. That's the mystery we're diving into.
So what we have here is a classic whodunit, a 3,000-year-old cold case. 2 suspects, 1 very large victim, and a couple of conflicting reports. To get to the bottom of it, we're going to need more evidence.
And this is our smoking gun. There's a third account, tucked away in the book of 1 Chronicles, that tells Elhanan's story a little differently. It says he didn't kill Goliath. He killed Goliath's brother, a guy named Lahmi. Now this seems to clear everything up perfectly, but it also opens up a new question. Was this the original story all along, or did someone later change it to make sure David got all the credit?
Well, it turns out the answer isn't some big conspiracy to protect David's reputation. It's actually something a lot more common and a lot more human. We can solve this whole thing by tracking a few simple copying mistakes, typos really, made by ancient scribes centuries ago.
Okay, let's lay out our 3 key witnesses side by side. You've got 1 Samuel, David killed Goliath. Simple enough. Then 2 Samuel, Elhanan killed Goliath. Total contradiction. But then look at 1 Chronicles. This is the key. Elhanan killed Lahmi, who was the brother of Goliath. The game-changing details are the name Lahmi and that little phrase, the brother of.
So how in the world did this happen? Well, textual scholars have pieced together a pretty convincing chain of events. It almost certainly started with the original text we see in Chronicles. Elhanan killed Lahmi. But then, a scribe makes a tiny mistake. He misreads the name Lahmi as the phrase, the Bethlehemite, which describes where Elhanan was from. Once Lahmi's name just vanished from the text, that phrase, the brother of, didn't make any sense anymore. So a later copyist, trying to be helpful, probably just deleted it. And just like that, through a tiny game of telephone, Elhanan's victim, Lahmi, morphs into Goliath himself.
And if you need more proof, here it is. This is the smoking gun. In the original Hebrew, the words for Lahmi and the Bethlehemite look and sound incredibly similar. I mean, you can just see how a scribe, maybe tired working by candlelight from an old worn-out scroll, could easily mix these 2 up. This isn't just a wild guess. It's a really well-known type of scribal error.
So, we've solved it. We know who killed who. David killed Goliath, Elhanan killed his brother. Case closed, right? Well, not so fast. It turns out the killer's identity isn't the only detail about this story that's gotten a little warped over the centuries. There's also the little matter of Goliath's actual size.
Yeah, it seems our giant story has been subject to another very common scribal habit, a bit of exaggeration. Goliath's legendary height, it turns out, is almost certainly another textual mistake.
So the standard version of the Bible, the one that most of our translations are based on, puts Goliath at an absolutely insane 9 feet 6 inches tall. To put that in perspective, that's more than 2 feet taller than Shaquille O'Neal. There is no reliable record of any human ever being that tall. It basically pushes the story into the realm of pure fantasy.
But when we dig into the oldest manuscripts we have, we're talking about the Dead Sea Scrolls and the ancient Greek translation, we find a different number entirely. They say he was 4 cubits and a span, and that comes out to about 6 feet 9 inches. Still a massive dude for that time, an absolute giant, but a humanly possible one.
And this height difference is so important. Sure, at 6'9", Goliath would have towered over the average Israelite soldier. But look who else is on the field. King Saul. The Bible makes a huge point of telling us Saul was the tallest man in all of Israel, a head taller than anyone else. That puts him somewhere around 6'6". Suddenly, he's in the same ballpark as Goliath.
And this is the whole point. A 6'9" Goliath makes King Saul's cowardice stand out even more. Saul was the king. He was their biggest and strongest warrior. This was his fight to fight. He was physically a pretty even match for the giant, but he was just paralyzed by fear. David's victory isn't about pulling off some physically impossible feat. It's about having the faith to step up and do the job that the king should have done but refused to.
Now,
To really get why this all matters, we have to zoom out and understand that Goliath wasn't just some random, really tall guy who showed up for a fight one day. His appearance was actually the climax of a war against giants that, according to the Bible, had been going on for hundreds of years.
This whole narrative thread starts way back in Genesis with the mysterious Nephilim. Centuries later, when the Israelite spies scout out the Promised Land, they come back terrified of their descendants, these giant clans called the Anakim. Then, during the conquest, Joshua specifically targets and defeats most of these clans, but a few survivors manage to escape, and they take refuge in the Philistine city of Gath. And guess where Goliath is from? Gath. He's one of the last of a dying breed.
And David's duel with Goliath was really just the opening act. The Bible actually records 4 more battles where David's top soldiers take on the rest of Goliath's relatives from Gath. There was Ishbi-Benob, who almost killed David in his old age. There was Sippai. There was Lahmi, the very brother we talked about, who Elhanan defeated. And there was this one unnamed giant who was so weird he had 24 fingers and toes. You see, this wasn't just a series of one-off fights. This was a targeted campaign to finish the job.
And this verse right here from Chronicles, it basically puts a bow on the whole thing. It's the final word, confirming that David and his men were the ones who finally ended the centuries-long war against the giant clans that Joshua had started.
So, after all of this detective work, what do we have? Well, by peeling back these ancient copying errors, we don't get a weaker, watered-down story. We actually get a story that makes more sense, is more believable, and is way more powerful theologically. So let's just recap. The mystery of who killed Goliath? It's a simple typo confusing Lahmi with the Bethlehemite. The real story is that David killed Goliath, and another warrior named Elhanan killed Goliath's brother, Lahmi. And how tall was he? The 9'6" number is an exaggeration found in later texts. The oldest sources say he was a much more realistic 6'9".
And this is really the key takeaway here. Doing this kind of textual investigation doesn't damage the story. It actually does the opposite. It strips away centuries of mistakes and exaggerations to reveal a story that is more historically plausible and, honestly, has a much sharper theological point. It makes the contrast between Saul's fear and David's faith crystal clear.
And all this leaves us with a pretty fascinating question to chew on. If a story as famous and foundational as David and Goliath has these kinds of layers hidden just beneath the surface, what other stories that we think we know so well might look completely different if we could just peel back the centuries and read the oldest versions available? It makes you wonder what other secrets are hiding in plain sight.